Hello and welcome to the 6 o'clock evening news. Our top story tonight, a spy plane off the coast of Cuba has spotted nuclear arms being manufactured.
They're suspected to be supplied by the USSR. We have no further info for you now, but the question is, what does this mean for the U.S. citizens and the possibility of a nuclear war?
We now take it down to the coast of Florida where we have our reporter, Peter Cohen, with the story.
Well, we're out here in Florida, and as you can see, the streets are relatively normal, because I'm not sure the realness and severity of this event have set in yet. That's all for now. Back to you, Jake.
Thanks, Pete. We'll check in again later when we receive more info. It's all for tonight. Stay tuned as the story develops.
We're back with more news and the latest stories regarding the Cuban Missile Crisis. Here's our host, Jake Downey.
It appears to be that we've just received a picture from the Soviet Union of the USSR building missiles in Cuba, possibly leading to an attack on the U.S. Here's a picture from the launch team. Let's take a look.
President Kennedy was visited by Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko, who asserts that the Soviet Union aid to Cuba is purely defensive and does not represent a threat to the United States. Kennedy is now releasing this statement live.
If the USSR begins to use offensive weaponry in Cuba, the gravest consequences will follow.
Today, President Kennedy left for a scheduled campaign trip to Ohio and Illinois. In Washington, his advisors continue to debate over the necessary and appropriate course of action. President Kennedy will then begin to work on a speech to inform the American people, which we will most likely release in the next few days.
We've just received word that the President has met with General Walter Sweeney of the Tactical Air Command about this crisis. We now bring it to Pete.
Breaking news. General Walter Sweeney of the Tactical Air Command has just told the President that an airstrike could not guarantee 100% destruction of the missiles.
Hello and welcome to the evening 6 o'clock news. Here's our latest on the Cuban Missile Crisis.
We are now on the 8th day since we have received word about the missiles in Cuba. Last night at 7 p.m., Kennedy spoke on live television, revealing the evidence of the Soviet missiles in Cuba and calling for their removal. Here's a short clip of the speech that he announced last night.
As we sit here, we see the evidence of the Soviet missiles in Cuba, and we must remove them. The establishment of a naval quarantine around the island should follow.
Good evening, welcome to the 6 o'clock news. Here's our top story tonight.
The ships of the naval quarantine fleet have moved into place around Cuba. Soviet submarines have threatened the quarantine by moving into the Caribbean area. Soviet freighters bound for Cuba with military supplies have stopped dead in the water. President Kennedy asked Khrushchev to halt any Russian ships heading toward Cuba. The president's greatest concern is that a U.S. Navy vessel would otherwise be forced to fire upon a Russian vessel, possibly igniting war between the superpowers.
The USSR has responded to Kennedy's statement by saying that if they surrender, they will be giving power to another country and that the U.S.'s statement is foolish. The U.S. now knows that some missiles in Cuba are operational, so the President has written personal drafts to Premier Khrushchev, again urging him to change the course of events. We now take it to Pete for more info.
UN Secretary General U Thant calls for a cooling off period, which is rejected by Kennedy because it would leave the missiles in place. Much public debate between the United States and the Soviet Union took place in the halls of the United Nations. During the debate in the Security Council, the normally courteous U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson aggressively confronted the Soviet UN counterpart, Valerian Sorin, with photographic evidence of the missiles in Cuba.
Some photographic evidence has shown accelerated construction of the missile sites and the uncrating of the Soviet Il-28 bombers at Cuban airfields. In a private letter, Fidel Castro has urged Nikita Khrushchev to initiate a nuclear strike first against the United States in the event of an American invasion on Cuba.
Breaking news. An American U-2 plane was shot down earlier today by a Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missile, and the pilot, Major Rudolf Anderson, was killed.
We just received word that last night, Robert Kennedy has met secretly with Ambassador Anatoly Dobrin. They reached a basic understanding. that the Soviet Union will withdraw the missiles from Cuba under the United Nations supervision in exchange for an American pledge not to invade Cuba. In an additional secret understanding, the United States agrees to eventually remove the Jupiter missiles from Turkey.
If all goes as planned, the Soviet Union hopefully will agree to dismantle the missile sites and to make certain that no additional missiles are shipped to Cuba.
For final word on the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet Union has accepted the proposed solution and releases the text of a Khrushchev letter affirming that the missiles will be removed in exchange for a non-invasion pledge from the United States.